associations who want to attract digital nomads, you should be saying to yourself, these are mobile, high-skilled remote workers that are dynamic, creative, adaptable, flexible, living their best lives. And boy, will they do good work in the hours that they're online. There's a lot to be learned from the corporate and the organizational side, both in opening their minds to employing and looking for nomads, but also from creating practical policies, recruitment drives, so that they can screen and that they can take care of them when they onboard them and that they understand the profile.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Rowena Hennigan was working from home in Ireland when her daughter began to develop chronic asthma. As it worsened, Ro was forced to make a drastic decision. She packed up her family and work and moved to one of the driest parts of Europe she could find, Zaragoza, Spain. This decision not only changed her family's life and her perspective and her daughter's health for the better, but it also set the foundation for Ro's career as a remote work expert and consultant in digital nomadism. Ro is a keynote speaker, university lecturer, and the founder of RoRemote, a remote skills training and consultancy company. Having lived and worked in 14 countries and traveling to different countries every year, her career spans over 2 decades of professional and industry experience. In this episode, we talk about Ro's time living and working and traveling globally as a digital nomad, the benefits of being a digital nomad, and how different countries effectively and ineffectively house digital nomads. We also discuss how and why companies should support digital nomads, the massive skill gaps in remote work, how the nomad community has started to build out an infrastructure to support them, and other topics. All right, Work for Humans simply would not be possible without its listeners. If you enjoy this episode, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I bring you Ro Hennigan. Ro Hennigan, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thanks so much, Dart. Lovely to be with you today.
I think this is an important conversation. You recently, and by the way, congratulations, you published an article in the Harvard Business Review on digital nomadism. And you've been living as a digital nomad for many years. And it's kind of a gap in the catalog of this podcast, because often we talk about remote work, we talk about digital nomadism, but we haven't really done a deep dive into it. And so I think it's an important thing. And it so happens that my wife and I are about to become nomadic for about the next year. And so it comes at a perfect time for me because I get to ask lots of questions, learn from you about how to do it well.
First of all, congratulations. And when we were chatting at the start, you said, I'm going to be pretty nomadic for the next year or so. And even that statement, Dart, that sort of going to be traveling lots, working while I'm traveling, maybe will you have a fixed base or not? Will it be for a significant amount of time? So the first thing we're going to start with is, what is digital nomadism? What is global mobility? What is location independence? What is a workation for a remote worker who might just go for a few weeks, a month? And that's where I'm coming from, as also known in my professional life as a remote work global leader and expert. I'm very interested in the whole area of expanding people's minds, not being stuck on labels and definitions, because that is where we are post-COVID. We need to open people's minds up to not just work from home, Dart. That even if you go away for a few days and you take your mobile kit, your laptop, and do a bit of work and you travel, or you spend times with friends, or you explore, or you go to a new place in your locality, that is a little dip in the water of work from anywhere, moving towards being a little bit more nomadic.
How did you start becoming more nomadic? How did that become possible? What was the motivation?
Well, back in 2007, I was around Southeast Asia, Australia, Asia, down between New Zealand, Australia and Fiji on a project. Early days of telecommunications, first mobile ringtone apps, etc. So that's some of my early career time. And I wasn't living, I was living out of a bag. I had my laptop. It was very much heavier than it is now. Dart, in a bag. And I was between different countries. I spent some time in Bangkok. I didn't have a fixed address. So that went on for about 3 years. And I didn't even know at the time there was such a thing as digital nomad. I was a backpacker, really. I wasn't staying in places for long. I was a backpacker with a laptop, really. That's kind of what it was. And it was only subsequently years later, about 10 years ago, I came back to Ireland and I met my husband there with our daughter, and she developed chronic asthma. And that's part of the story. We had a horrible couple of years when she was very small in Dublin. And both of us were remote working, Dart, at the time. And we both said, hang on, we have European passports. We can be anywhere in Europe. And with the sick child, that global mobility kicked in, that location independence. And for her health, we packed our bags under a lot of distress and duress and extreme exhaustion and moved to the driest part where I'm joining you today of the world, of Spain, and one of the driest places in the world, Zaragoza in the north of Spain. Luckily, she's improved, but that's part of the story as well. Myself, my family, and I can speak certainly on behalf of my husband, we don't want to be tied to one place. We want that global mobility. And part of the story is part of everyone's story, anyone tuning in today as well. COVID happened, Dart, and suddenly we couldn't do anything. We couldn't travel. We couldn't move. And even during the lockdowns in Spain, we escaped. We got out. We packed our bags again, did some of the schooling again from home, and went to the beach side, because suddenly in those 2 years, mobility was precious. Travel was precious because people were tied down. So the story has many chapters. And at the moment, we're part-time nomadic. Some of the purists would say that's not really nomadic at all. But I tend to disagree. I've written the piece for the Harvard Business Review. I've researched nomadism. I have a LinkedIn learning course on nomadism. I feel remote work and nomadism are very related. And what I am keen to get people to think about is that even for short periods of time, going nomadic, leaving a base if you have it, and traveling and working and moving over certain periods of time. For some people, they say a month, 3 months. We do it as a family up to 4 months a year. We're planning our next trip at the moment as a family. And it's really important to us as a lifestyle. And we don't want a mortgage. We don't want to be tied down. And even this morning, I just heard, a couple of hours ago here in Spain, I heard a report saying that the climate crisis is gaining momentum. There's going to be more climate refugees. We've got a really significant weather heating up, the planet's heating up, and we all know this. So not being tied to one place is very, very important part of my values as a person and my family values.
And it's interesting on a lot of different levels. First of all, COVID, for many people, it freed them up to work from where they wanted to work from. For you, it pinned you down, right? You were already so mobile that for you, COVID was a limitation. And the second thing is that if you look at the history of migration, a lot of times it has been driven by climate or also seasonality, but climate. You spoke for a second about the variety of nomads. I agree. I don't want to pin it down to a particular term, but I do want to know what the variation is and what the range is.
MBO has some research, we'll share it in the notes, but it's expanding. It's a massive MBO partners out of the States. It's a massive growing market. People who I either identify as nomadic or even for part of the year, like I said, they want to not be tied down. And the overlap into, for example, work for anywhere from a commercial perspective, or from a big company enterprise perspective. A lot of companies are looking at global mobility for their high earners, for their key staff. It used to be called relocation, but some of these high levels of talent are coming to them saying, we want to travel 3-4 months a year. We want the option of relocation, even with the family. So again, when you talk about definitions, there's so many different profiles in there. There's so many different categories. So the research is showing that people who identify as nomadic, maybe we could also look, and you mentioned migration, but also with the more of an economic hat on. If we look globally, owning a property for many young people, for Gen Zs, etc., is nigh or impossible in a lot of countries now. I mean, it used to be something that people would aspire to. So the whole media interested, letting out your property, Airbnb, long-term rentals, all this also is building where people don't want to be tied down maybe for long periods of time. And therefore, because they can work with a computer, and I also want to acknowledge my and your privilege as tech workers, that because they can work from a computer with the Wi-Fi connection, they can be nomadic. They can move around. And I do a lot of work with an Indian company or Indian American company called Noral, who are looking even just at the Indian continent and the amount of nomads there, because there's a lot of tech workers there. And a lot of those tech workers, in a few weeks in my newsletter, will be featuring a female nomad out of India. And she mainly just travels around India. And that's fine. There's a lot of traveling to be done around India. So it's really interesting to even think that, is it someone who is maybe just staying with friends, moving around, renting accommodation and temporary, but they maybe have a postal address, but they don't have a fixed base, they don't have the fixed costs. And mentally, the mindset, and I hope I'm answering your question, is also not to be too tied to one place, to feel that liberty of being able to choose where you work from. Also, interestingly, again, for knowledge workers, where knowledge working is developing into, we talk about deep work, creative work, focus work. Look, I've written a book at a co-living for 2 weeks in a rural location. I wrote an ebook in 2 weeks. Seriously, there is a really unacknowledged piece that nomads or anyone who've tried this gets, that if you move location as a computer worker, you change your environment, you can massively boost tapping into creativity and productivity. So I've touched on a few themes there. I hope that's helpful, but that's why I don't want to stick with labels and definitions too much. I just want to talk about more of the benefits and the stories of the lifestyle, because that's what I want people to hear.
Absolutely. That sounds great. And I'll tell you one version of nomadism that I just heard that I'd never heard before. There's a company, and I wish I remembered the name, it would be really handy for this, that is actually moving its headquarters every 6 months.
Oh, interesting.
And it's just not a very big company, but basically everybody goes to Berlin. And then everybody goes to Bangalore, which I'll tell you, there were a couple people on the call who were from that company and their eyes were lit up. They were very excited about it. So I'll admit, I'm a little hooked on definitions. I like it.
That's okay.
I'm an analyst and I'm always sort of like, well, what about this possibility? There's a crowd that I have fallen in with a couple of different times in my life, which I call the international vagabonds. And they are different in a key way, which is, first of all, they tend to be very international and they tend to be from wealthy countries. And they are traveling the world, going to where the seasonal work is.
Yes.
Sometimes a decade at a time, they're on the road. The difference is they're a quite similar population, I think, to the people like us in high tech, which is that they're college educated, they are privileged, and the difference is they're not digital.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So the work changes as they move. And so one of the things about this is that your work stays the same as you move. So here's some questions. I do want to talk about the benefits of being nomadic. Do you work differently in different places? Does the culture affect you? Does the pace affect you? And are there benefits to that?
Totally. So if we take, for example, we did 2 months of nomadic, and leaning into the piece about the definition, we'll also share in the notes, there's a great piece of research from Dave Cook, who's an anthropologist who's trying to put some definitions around digital nomads, location independence. And he's also got a schema or a model as well, Dart, that looks at some of these variations, whether you have a fixed space or not, whether you're doing it so many months a year, all those kind of different factors, whether you're in a family, whether you're staying with friends, whether you're renting independently, whether you're with a company, whether you're an independent freelancer, for example, as well. So leaning into the definition, I'm not trying to avoid that, but in terms of the benefits, definitely I can comment on that for me, and anyone who's tuning in, I can give them free access as well as a gift through my LinkedIn learning course. One of the things I talk about on there is preparation for nomading and being ready, being mindset and ready for when you go to this new place. What is your focus going to be? Are you doing business as usual, BAU, or is it for a special project? What are your other commitments there? So if we think about that as well and going through that list of factors, because someone might pick a destination, that destination choice piece, for various different reasons, meeting with family, friends, because they're interested in the culture, because they surf Dart. You mentioned a subculture of people who travel. There are groups of surfers, nomads, who travel together. I'm a snowboarder. I've done a little bit of that in my time as well, where I've been working, for example, from the south of New Zealand in a ski resort. So you could be going for different reasons. You could be going for like a particular community or destination. I'm also a board member, believe it or not, with Digital Nomad Association Croatia, recently appointed as one of their board members in their advisory board. And they're one of the most successful destination associations who want to attract digital nomads and, to a point, remote workers, because there's a fine line as well between someone who might go for a small period of time as a remote worker and then may transition to the digital nomad visa in Croatia. So while you're going to a place, Croatia is very up and coming. We heard about Portugal, Lisbon, Mexico, Puerto del Carmen. I mean, we could do a whole podcast just on destinations, but your reason for going is very important in terms of you doing that piece of self-reflection and assessment before you go, but also why you're going, what you're looking for. And it's that intention, that word intention. And what I have to be very clear on is that me for 4 months a year, potentially some of it in my family or not, this year we've got about 2.5 months and it's all planned out. As a family, I've got about 2 months coming and going from Spain on my own, with the different intentions for those trips and the different things I'm trying to tap into, whether I'm going for a certain reason, whether I'm interested in travel without working within that, is very different to, say, someone who's fully nomadic. Some of these people, I work with them, I talk to them every day. I have a very good nomadic friend called Juliana. She's currently in Brazil. She's coming back to Europe. She has been living out of a bag for about 5 years, almost completely nomadic the whole time. And she talks about transition periods and being really ready for her moves, planning her moves. She also talks about slowmading, which is a word which has come up from the community in recent years, because the pace of travel can also take a toll on people. So really planning those routes, really planning the transition, trying to stay. I know a lot of nomads use the rule, a minimum of 3 weeks, if not up to 6 weeks in a place, and really trying to settle. So one of the things I want to really put across on this, I'm practicing what I preach today. I'm in a co-working space, a shared space. And a lot of nomads don't simply go to an Airbnb in Dubrovnik or in Split or on an island in Croatia. They go to a co-working so that they can focus and do their work in the co-working the hours that they're there, not try and work with distraction from a rental property that might not be suitable. And often then they can find community and interaction. Within that community, then they do their work, they wrap up their bag, they store their laptop, and they go and enjoy the travel and the sightseeing around them. The biggest motivation hack that people don't understand by this type of lifestyle, whether you do it permanently or temporary, is, believe me, when you want to walk around the castle in Dubrovnik at 5 o'clock and meet a guide there, you will get your work done between 9 to 4. You'll take your lunch, but your motivation is, I'm doing beautiful sightseeing. I'm going for a sunset cruise. I'm meeting the guide to walk the walls of Dubrovnik. And it's so underestimated, Dart, by people until they've done it, that for a lot of people, the focus is actually amplified, right, when they travel. Not for everyone, but for a lot.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a whole lot of things that are taken off of your hands when you're traveling that way. For instance, today I have somebody coming over to reinstall the washing machine that broke, and I have to monitor that. And that's not something you have to deal with. That's actually a distraction that's gone. I have to pull some weeds this weekend. Distraction gone, that part is gone. So you talked about community. And one of the things that I wonder is if this can be lonely and whether or not you can find community if you need community, and whether that community is local or whether it's other nomads.
Well, that really depends on so many things, but you can find community. Some of the reasons I've been fascinated with my research and investigations, particularly in the last 2 years, preparing for the LinkedIn course, is the amount of vibrant, even if they're just on Telegram groups, WhatsApp groups, etc., nomad communities out there, wrapped around, for example, locations, maybe around interests, yoga, surfing, these different topics and themes. Some of the communities will have subgroups on Discord or Slack where they'll talk about things to look out for when you're in Albania, top tips for North Macedonia, best nomadic places or best places to co-work from in Chiang Mai in Thailand. Like, it's down to that level of detail. So what's really interesting, and I can credit Tanya, who's a part of Digital Nomad Association Croatia, she's on the board as well. She said for her experience with nomads is that they look to form those initial relationships and research online, Dart, as part of their travel planning, and then they meet in person. So they do something really interesting that not a lot of remote workers have quite gotten yet, especially if they've only worked from home. They know that the online connection is just the start. And these are people of all ages that then when they get to a destination, most of them actively look to make personal relationships. And then, of course, within that, I was at the Tirana Digital Nomad Festival last year in Albania, and 2 different groups of people were traveling together. Some of them were going on to South Africa. Some of them were meeting up later in Turkey. So there's this amazing joining of our digital world where they can keep in contact with each other. They're always meeting up. I'm going to Turkey next week, Dart, for an event. And even just in some of my contacts, I found 2 people who are already in Turkey, one of which she's messaged me separately to give me recommendations on eco activities and sustainable activities in Istanbul, because that's one of the things I always look for when I travel. So I'm just giving you some examples there of how wholesome those communities can be and nurturing. And when, yes, of course, loneliness can be an issue, as it is in our modern world. But what I found fascinating is the majority of nomads I have met are very aware of their social connection needs, their needs for community, their needs for a support network, that at times they can be overwhelmed, maybe homesick, all the natural things you would come across when you're traveling extensively, and that very safe in-person events exist to support these travelers, these nomads. And it's wonderful to see.
Are there any specific online communities or platforms that are good for this?
Yes. So most of the destinations will have some sort of WhatsApp groups, like even Digital Nomad Association has a mailing list for Croatia and WhatsApp groups, for example, for that. Any events that happen, Dart, they're usually hooked around events. So the events that I've already mentioned, like Tirana, already had a very active WhatsApp group, which people stayed members of. Some of the more organized Nomad Fest, Michelle Murray, who's a good contact of mine, she organizes regular events, and there's different groups you can connect with, both online and via mobile apps. So again, surf groups, co-living is another one, co-living in co-working centers. Get Croissant app is a co-working app that I know a lot of nomads use, and they can go to the same co-working spaces. It tends to revolve around, again, as we speak about countries like you'll know with Mexico, Portugal, you'll find those hotspots. And around those hotspots, you'll find events, you'll find meetups, and normally then the different online communities exist. Is there a big global one? Not really that I know of. People tend to be in these subsections of interest, and you might move within them. Then I also want to add that Twitter is really good, actually, for nomads, particularly on the indie hacker side of things, the entrepreneurs that are nomadic. And there's a lot of Twitter spaces that happen there that I've seen, that I've been part of. A lot of Discord channels under different other, as I said, subsets of interest.
It's already transformed my understanding of digital nomadism, which is, I think of it as solitary. It's not. It's a crowd. The idea of these meetups, God, that sounds like a lot of fun. It also solves a mystery, which is why my show peaks at #1 in Croatia.
Oh my God.
When that first happened, I was like, Croatia? But of course, there's a lot of people thinking about their experience of work in Croatia.
Oh, Croatia is amazing. And actually, one of my board member colleagues is Steve Terensensky. I hope I've said that right, Croatian surname, but he's originally from America, and he's a obviously second generation or Croatian ancestry, and he's a copywriter based as one of the main digital nomad ambassadors in Zagreb. So there's a massive community. I mean, that's what I'm affiliated with. There's fantastic communities in Portugal. There's fantastic communities in Mexico. There's fantastic communities in Thailand. Nearly any country, as I said, I can name a contact or even through my LinkedIn community say, there's someone. Malta is a very active community. Cyprus is growing. So all these locations with the digital nomad visas being part of the incentive are building and growing. And I'm really glad that's changed in your perception, because that's the misconception. I think also the media hasn't done a great job in terms of that profile of someone sitting in a beach in Bali or whatever. And okay, it's fine, there's sunbathing, but is it really sustainable? Is it glossy? Actually, you probably find that nomad is volunteering, and hand on heart, I've got loads of stories, right? Volunteering with local charities, giving back, fundraising. Nomads Giving Back is an amazing organization that works out of a lot of these nomad hotspots where they're organizing beach cleanups, volunteering, lots and lots of different things. So I hope I've really got you thinking that, especially with your planning for your traveling, that A, you can find community, you won't be lonely, you just take some research first. And B, that you can tread gently, you can tread lightly as a nomad. When you go to these places, there are amazing ways to connect with community in the more established places.
Let's talk about what countries are doing right. When a country is doing things right to make digital nomadism work, what are they doing?
So this is a really hot topic at the moment. And the area of digital nomad visas in their own right is a whole subject matter expert area. Even in my course, I touch on it because back when I was recording it last year, I think there was almost 50 countries with some sort of offering. And now I think it's nearer to 100. I mean, it's exploded. There's a lot of debate, okay? Because think about it, Dart. What do nomads do? They move around. So if you create a visa that's encouraging, like the Spanish one, people to stay in your country for 2 years, okay, Spain is a pretty big country, but maybe it's not too big to be moving around for 2 years of, all of a time. It's not quite Australia or India, as we've mentioned. So what's happened is there's a lot of confusion with governments because they're trying to attract high-tech workers and get them to stay. And that's not really nomadism, right? That's more, I just want your tax dollars in the future. So you come here, bring your computer with you. We'll give you an incentive to start with, but it's very short-termist in its views because many of them don't want to stay for longer periods. So I'm not going to comment and call out specific ones, but I will suggest people think about that when they're looking at the visas, because if you look at it with that kind of a lens, it maybe changes your thinking, right? Also, a lot of the visas have been reactive in recent years, and it's beginning to change where they're improving. So that's part of what I'm trying to do, working as part of the board in DNA Croatia. They do have a visa. They know there's lots of improvements to be made. And what they're trying to do is look at that being maybe more open, shorter periods of time, working with other countries in the region there. So they've spoken, and they do meetings with Albania, Serbia, North Macedonia, et cetera, all those regions. Because the whole idea then would be you could do something working as a whole region together. That's would be probably cleverer or more smart in thinking. So that's one of the things that some regions, more so than countries, are doing. Plumia is an amazing organization. It's the social enterprise part of Safety Wing, which is an insurer for nomads. And they are looking at borderless citizenship and borderless and a more multi-location visa for nomads globally. They're working on that piece of research. So again, all I can say is a lot of the visas are really actually targeting remote workers that they want to stay rather than nomads. And I just want to say that, if we chatted again in 2 years' time, Dart, this will have really evolved. Because some of the early adopters of visas, Estonia, Barbados, they will find that these next iterations will be much better. But to also answer your question, coming back to the earlier pieces, it's one thing putting in a visa and a policy type of effort or incentive. It's a total other thing to have the right infrastructure in your country or your region when you attract. So I've often spoken even in HBR about, do you have the correct Wi-Fi level? Big issue. Many rural places don't. Even Croatia will hold their hands up and say, in some of the most rural areas, we're not great. We're okay in the city, etc., etc. So that's one thing to be careful of, because obviously depending on where you enter, as a nomad, you might come in considering a visa, but then you can't find any decent connection to do your work. And then you'll exit again because you've probably come in on a tourist visa and you're not going to stay. So that's a big clangor. It's a big challenge. Secondly, the community piece alongside that infrastructure, co-working, shared spaces, which again, going forward in the remote workplace world, it's going to be really important. It's the same thing for nomads. And having those events and support for nomads are really, really important. And again, look to what Gonzalo Hall has done on Madeira Island, the biggest digital nomad village in the world. There's lots of amazing examples out there. Cabo Verde as well, he's working with, and his team also over in Brazil, in Pipa. So there's lots of best case examples to answer that question. So from your research for yourself personally, I'm also giving you some ideas because there are communities that have had governmental or local support that have really thrived in certain parts of the world.
How about safety?
Really good question. It's an issue. It's an issue not just for solo travelers of any gender, for members of LGBTQ plus female solo travelers, any parts of the community, wider nomad community that may feel a little bit more nervous. And that's one of the things, for example, in some of the more established places, like what's happening in Croatia, Lisbon, Madeira, etc., where that's often been factored in. So whatever about the visa being created, the offer of you coming and joining in, you might be invited into a Slack channel, you might get an onboarding email, and that will give you the advice to connect with others who've been there, who can give you advice. So you hear it a lot. I mean, I had a call with someone a few weeks ago who's based in a part of Mexico, and she was saying to me, I'm often careful here, there, and there. So the whole idea is, if I was going to travel there, I would reach out, I would check. So safety is an issue. It's a big issue. It's something, again, in these communities we spoke about, you can look for the information, you can test it out. My trip to Turkey that I mentioned next week, I already had my nomadic friend that's based in a different part of Turkey say, make sure you check your travel insurance because of the elections. There's some turbulence in Istanbul. Make sure that you read. So within your network, as you're checking, as you're doing your research, all of us, but particularly certain groups, need to do their due diligence so that they're ready and then that they know about being safe. And that's why I also think using the infrastructure of the nomad communities that have already evolved. There's nomad solutions created by nomads for travel insurance, for community connection, for meeting and dating other nomads. The list goes on and on. There's one of my good friends, Chris, who's built a special newsletter looking for long-term accommodation for nomads via Airbnb, which have been tested, which are safe, which have all the equipment for long-term living. So he's remote-based, by the way, but he's curated that as a nomad for himself, living out of Airbnbs with his partner for 5 years. And he recognized that need in the market. So all of these evolving services, Nomad Stays is another one by Mark and Linda, who are nomadic for many years from Australia originally. They travel with their dog, for example, and they recommend stays that are pet friendly because some nomads have animals. They also take care of wheelchair users that might be nomadic and have listings for them. I'm giving you lots of ideas, but that safety and also that taking care of the community. What's been fascinating to me is nomads themselves are coming up with these solutions. They're creating them.
What do companies do right to support nomads?
So first of all, very, very first of all, if you're from a company and you've heard any of this, you should be saying to yourself, these are mobile, high-skilled remote workers that are dynamic, creative, adaptable, flexible, living their best lives. They are traveling and boy, will they do good work in the hours that they're online. So that's one of the things I advocate for is more open-mindedness from employers, from organizations at the potential skills and talent profile of these nomads. Because I have to be honest with you, not so much in the last couple of years, but up to, and we're going through obviously some tech layoffs and challenges, there was a lot of views that nomads were not employees. And I can bust that view. Because we've got in my collection of digital nomad stories, and I've got 21 of them that have been published through my newsletters. They're all females, Dart, and 4 of them I think have been fully employed. And one of them is a head of people and culture with an insurance company who's nomadic. So there's a lot to be learned from the corporate and the organizational side, both in opening their minds to employing and looking for nomads, but also from creating practical policies, recruitment drives, so that they can screen and that they can take care of them when they onboard them and that they understand the profile. It's one of the areas of increasing amounts of interest at the moment in my world. And I'm really glad to hear that.
I'll tell you, one of the things that makes it hard from a corporate perspective is our data models, which is the data models that companies like Workday, for instance. Workday, I don't know what it is today because I haven't checked into it recently, but location is something that you keep track of. You keep track of it for tax purposes. You keep track of it for other things. Well, first of all, it doesn't deal very well with even working 2 places in a week. So, for instance, if you're working in New York City, but you work the rest of the week in New Jersey, those are actually 2 different tax locations. And so from a taxation perspective, it is a headache. And I don't know how companies deal with somebody who's no place, right? Every place.
There are solutions out there, okay? Obviously, there's the contractor model, okay, which is what some companies will look at. It's a contractor model where they put over the responsibility to the person themselves, even though they're contracting them and they're treated more like a high quality employee. That does happen. It's not always publicized, Art. Sometimes it happens a little bit more quietly and all that. But in terms of what might be interesting for you, is one of my collaborators that I work with is an amazing Irish startup, Irish International. They're the founders in all over the world, Ireland, Portugal, and Australia. So it's a remote first company, really. And they're called Work From Anywhere team. And they're working with on the tax and compliance piece for global mobility and looking at exactly that, at the systems, at what needs to happen, at the tax risks, because there are some for the employment model, and that's why it hasn't evolved as quickly as we would like. And they have just signed a deal with Mercer this week to provide tax solutions for Work From Anywhere. So it's not perfect. One thing I will say is that with that type of model, you might find that year on year, the nomads that might want, or the Work From Anywhere employees might be granted, say, 3 or 6 months within certain territories. So it won't be as fully nomadic, but it will still have a certain element of liberty to it. But I hear you, because I've heard that elsewhere, that the systems in big enterprise companies, the HR systems, the Workdays and the like, they also at a tracking level are can cause a lot of issues. So the reality of it is that at the moment, a lot of them are solopreneurs, entrepreneurs, nomads, maybe 50 to 60% are freelancers. And there is only a portion who possibly are fully nomadic. 1 or 2 of the examples I know is they're fully nomadic within continents, if that makes sense. So if we look at Latin America, possibly with returning to either Canada or the States and the base regularly, that would be something that some employers would consider over there, for example.
How does your daughter feel about being a nomad?
She knows she's a part-time nomad. So she goes to school. Spain, this was one of the reasons we could keep up the lifestyle even part-time. Spain is an interesting school system, Dart. They very much believe in children enjoying their downtime. Right? She has holidays from about the 15th, 16th of September this year coming right through to she's school from the 15th of September to, say, the 2nd, 3rd week of June. So she has essentially 3 months off, which is very hard for working parents in Spain, and why a lot of summer camps exist. And then she has about a month and a bit the rest of the year. So what we normally do, like I was saying, and we're 6 years based in Spain, We have so far been to Indonesia for 2 months one summer. We were based with family and traveling around in Vietnam as well there, and remote working. So we were mixing the two together. We've been to Gran Canaria and the Canary Islands, which was lovely, for 2 months as well, a few summers ago. Last year we were in Portugal, and this year we're going to Italy and then on to Croatia as part of my project with Croatia as a family. She knows that she travels these months, but she also knows when she's at home. So she's got a little rhythm, right? Or what she calls home or our base. And she's got a little rhythm going. And she collects, this being very honest with you, she collects fridge magnets. I have a lovely video of her arranging them. And she's obsessed with different countries. She's very excited about going to Italy because she can understand. She's a fluent Spanish speaker now, so she can understand some Italian. And she loves it. I think I need to make it very clear for people listening that we've been doing, certainly when we went to Bali, that was with the support of my family there for the majority of the time. We joined in on some local activities, Dart, where she was in a sort of activity camp with one of her cousins there. And even in Gran Canaria, she was in a local summer camp because she speaks Spanish. Last year and this year, we're with Boundless Life, which is an amazing organization, startup, that is catering for nomadic families around the world with an education system, both primary and secondary level. And they have bases in Sintra, Tuscany, Syros Island in Greece, and also in Bali. And they have a lot of families that travel with them around the world who are nomadic. And there is a lot of American families in their cohorts. So a lot of Americans who have taken their businesses on the road and their children, and rather than just homeschooling or world schooling, which does happen as well, where they join in with other families and teach on the road, they are joining in with these cohorts via Boundless Life. So Boundless Life is a 360 solution for families who want global mobility and a nomadic type of lifestyle, where children can join in semesters of education in the different locations. They learn in cohort models in person, and the parents get access to a co-working space, events, community events, and accommodation. How cool is that?
Wow. So what that is shaping up as, that I had not imagined, is essentially, it's like a tour. It's put together like a tour, which is, we're going to take care of all of those things that are peripheral to your travel, your education, your co-working, where you're going to live. And do these classes move together?
No, you don't.
Or they join, yeah.
They're joining, but what's happened, of course, is some of them are moving together in community.
Right.
So it's happening naturally that some of the cohorts, so for example, we already know that there's some children my daughter knows that will be in Tuscany this year that were already in Portugal last year, and she's excited to see them. We're only doing it one semester a year. We're doing the summer semester at the moment, and hopefully that will continue because she's very excited about it. So can you imagine the others who are traveling together? And so I'm really glad you asked about families, because families is a really growing part. And again, I've got the MBO research to share, which talks about nomads in general. The growth shows 131% growth since 2019 of the nomadic community, or people who are identifying with nomadic. And with MBO partners, they're going to look at families in their next round of research, and I'm helping them with that. But I think it's really interesting for families listening, because that's the question I get asked so much. I've got kids and I can't do this. And I straight away go, you might not be able to do it full time. I don't know what your education needs are, because children also can have very different needs and certain special needs. But there are certainly ways to do it part-time. There's certainly ways to explore it or take a year out. And that's exciting for me, Dark, because I've seen how it's changed my daughter's perspective on the world. I've seen how she's happy to be independent and social in any situation. And that's a gift as a parent. Travel's a gift. I mean, we're privileged. Travel is a gift, but to give that to my child, it's one of the reasons I do what I do. It's one of the reasons, I want to talk to people like you and spread the word, because it's all about the advocacy, and we're creating future citizens who we cannot underestimate how important cultural appreciation is through travel. It's a gift.
Yeah. I was thinking about how I grew up, which is that my father was a professor, and so we got sabbaticals every 7 years. And so we lived someplace for a year. And so we lived in Italy for a year. We lived in Australia for a year. My brothers and sisters lived in Brazil for a year. And it did change our perspective, just simply getting out of your own country at all and being able to observe your own country from a sort of a third person perspective. That alone was very, very valuable. But I imagine your daughter, let's talk about her friends. Where are they from? And so in a way, what I'm asking is, where are nomads from? Are there certain countries that are highly represented and certain countries that are less represented?
Well, if we look at these friends she's encountered over the recent years, actually, it's a really good question because there's a lot of debate that comes up within the nomadic community, particularly the ones who are maybe really active nomadic, about where are you from? That whole, where is your identity from if you're moving a lot? Because we've spoken, just to share, we've spoken about going fully nomadic potentially when she'll be finished primary school here in Spain in 2 years. And we've discussed it. And so far, I mean, she's 9. I know they can change their mind, but so far she's happy with that idea of literally not having a base at all, and that we would put some stuff into storage and travel the world while she would attend some classes in person, and there's other solutions for that, and we would travel. So she has friends that they say, well, I was born in, which is interesting. I've heard them say that I was born in France, or I was born in Berlin, or I was born in Germany, but now I live in the world, now we travel. So there's a whole raft of these families that are, when I say cultural appreciation, I mean it at the most profound level. It's hard to explain until you've encountered. From her close friends that she mixes with regularly, even here in Spain, which is, by the way, much more multicultural than what we would have seen in Ireland. And Ireland's not too bad. I mean, she mixes with Taiwanese, Dominican Republic, Russians, Ukrainians, Polish, of all different nationalities. I think in her class alone, there is 14 languages spoken, as well as Spanish and English. And she's in the public system here, Dort. She's not in any type of private system here because we've chosen that on purpose. We felt it was much more multicultural and better for her. But I think they're from everywhere. They really are. It sounds cheesy, and I want to be careful using the term because I use it myself. I mean, I say I'm European, but I say I'm a global citizen. I feel like a global citizen. I feel like that's what she hopefully identifies with as well. Somos todos iguales is one of the terms we use at home as a family. We're all equal. We're all equal. Somos todos iguales in Espanol. And that's one of our family values. And if that reflects from the travel, because she's been to, I think, 12 countries already, or 14 countries in her 9 years, we must count it. But meeting all these different nationalities, you take people, we're all equal. You take people the same. And nationality, passports, are they, again, I know you like your definitions, so I'm being careful about our labels, but are they binding? And from a child's perspective, isn't it wonderful that that's not the first thing that comes to their mind? That's what I'm hoping for as a parent.
So my wife grew up between Mexico and the United States, usually in the countryside of Mexico and usually in wealthy communities in the United States. So Palo Alto, Tahoe, and then Jocotepec, Jalisco, and really small towns around Mexico. It's resulted in her sometimes feeling very in between as an identity, which is, I'm not sure she ends up feeling both. A part of the reason is that when in Mexico, she's perceived as an American. When in the United States, she can be perceived as somebody from Mexico. And so she does feel in between. I think if you were to disrupt that enough, because it's no longer 2, it's 50, suddenly that might actually change into something new, which is, I'm none of those things, right? I don't need to choose. I'm 50 things.
And I can be all or a part of all of these things together. I can represent a part of those many mix of things. I guess giving you the European perspective, I very much get that. Because even when I look at Europe as a melting pot, which again, I mean, I've spent a bit of time in the States, but yeah, we've got an interesting thing going. It's certainly with the European mindset and sort of disposition that we're all European, and that's so diverse. that's so diverse in terms of you know the difference between Scandinavian culture and German culture to, you know, even parts of more Eastern Europe. So that's interesting. But I just wonder if you've got a really good point there is all and everything together. It's global and it's evolving. And it's not, look, you know, I left home when I was 19. I've lived in 14 countries. I've always traveled the world as many Irish have. And that doesn't mean I deny my Irishness. It doesn't mean I forget my Irish roots. I speak Irish Gaelic, for example. I often connect and think in Irish because it's a very beautiful language. So cultural identity, if there's a primary one that you connect with, still doesn't mean that there can't be many others. And I think, and I hope for my daughter that she cares more about the person. She doesn't care about the colour of skin, the passport, the label that comes with an accent. It's just more taking someone at face value. And that's what, you know, it's really helpful talking it through with you, but that's why travel is so important to us. I think travel is one of those things, and the liberty of travel, that you could postulate on for your whole life, Dart, your whole life.
I have several questions I ask at the end of every interview. This is primarily a show about the design of work and why we should design it better and how we might design it better. And so I ask marketing questions about work as if it's a product. By the way, I never asked actually what you do for a living. What kind of work do you do?
So I've got an interesting model of business, Dart. I am a solopreneur with a freelance team globally based of remote workers who've been supporting me on average for 3 years. Each one of them, there's 5 of them all around the world in different parts of the world. And with that business, with that business model, I have a low risk approach to the whole. I have been corporate side. I have a very successful past career in big corporates. And with that business model, I do remote work, thought leadership, content, training, education, keynotes, and also lean very much into digital nomadism with that expertise. So I've already mentioned I'm a LinkedIn top voice learning instructor as well. And I've got courses on LinkedIn. But what might be more interesting to people, and I have mentioned it, is I decided about a year ago that I really wanted to make a change. I've been in high tech myself, like you, for many years, almost 24 years. So I could really see change coming from the top down rather than the bottom up. And I did a piece of training within Europe because Europe is bringing in a quota dart for female and gender representation on boards and at board level across Europe, public and private companies. So I did my board training qualification with an organization called European Women on Boards. And my first voluntary position, is with Digital Nomad Association, an NGO for Croatia. And that's one of the things I'm focusing on. So consulting, training, content, thought, leadership. But over the next couple of years, which may be interesting to people, I want to change it from the boards down. So I want to sit on boards, remote first organizations. I'm seeking board positions actively. And that's something that the design of work could be interesting leading into that, because historically women have been very underrepresented on boards, as you may know. And as a parent, as a female in tech for many years, I believe I have a lot of value to bring to any table, whether it be virtual or otherwise, as a board member. And I'm keen to serve, advise, and help different organizations and associations from that level of view.
Well, that's a good lead into one of my closing questions, which is, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
What job do I hire my job to do? It's late in the day here, Dart. I get to that. What would I call the job? Is that I'm kind of trying to get...
No, if you hire a shovel to dig a hole and you hire a drill.
Oh my God, I have the answer, but I don't know if you can put it, you'll keep it in the podcast. No, it's a good answer. My name's Rowena, and I often get mistaked by, there is an appliance maker called Rowena, and Rowena make kitchen appliances. And one of them I've been mistaken for is a juice extractor. I had a friend saying, well, you're like a juice extractor. So I think I would get a juice extractor, because I think one of my skills is squeezing the best out of the world, the best out of life, the best out of everyone I come in contact with, and basically challenging them to give their best, to give their juice, to give the best juice. It sounds a bit cheesy, but
no, it does not. It does not at all. There's actually one of the responses I've gotten to this question is I hire my job to see others shine and to help others shine, and that's an important part of what people get out of their work. And so to the idea that you hire your work to bring out more good.
Yeah, the best quality out of, because often people say, as we know, nutrition-wise, which I also find interesting, the juice of it, often fruit and veg, it's the best. It has the best nutrients for you. So, yes.
You know why that also fits really well with digital nomadism, or at least work in general, is this idea that the percentage of your work that's actually useful.
Yes.
And the idea that you can concentrate down the time you spend working to just the part that's useful, that's actually productive.
Yes.
I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. And giving individuals the liberty to do that. I mean, a farrier that's taking care of horses' hooves in a stable, he or she doing their work, we're not watching them all day long. They might take a walk for the field or clean their tools or have a cup of tea. But, it's their work still gets done so that when you come to pick up your horse later in the day or whatever. In olden times, for those more manual stuff and those craftsman types of things, you trust the craftsperson to do the work when they were best able.
That's an important point, which I really hadn't thought about before, which is that, when we were working in factories, we all had to be there at the same time because I was going to finish this part, I was going to pass it to you, and so on and so forth. So location became a part of what work was, one of the things that had to remain stable. But the other thing is time. I wonder if your relationship to time as a nomad changes, which is you do the work when it fits, because we can work asynchronously.
Exactly. And that's a word we haven't used yet. And that's what's interesting to look, Dart. When I did my little pitch to how good nomads could be for enterprises and companies, how they're a kind of untapped talent pool, many of those nomads are hacking their own daily routine. And it's kind of like a dichotomy. It's got two parts. Either very good at, I've got a project deadline, I'm going to sit down and do X, Y, and Z, and I'm calendar blocking, etc., no matter where they are, sat on a beach, on a mountainside, whatever. Or they're also very good at self-realizing their flow state and knowing what helps them with flow. And some of them, for example, will work on a Sunday. Some of them like to work when other people, I've heard all different versions. It doesn't matter what the version is. It's the fact that it's when they believe they're most productive. And therefore they use time and they hack time in that way to be very self-aware and tap into it. So I find that really interesting as well.
Yeah, it lends itself to a model that we developed for running global meetings, which was a follow the sun model, which is that this was in a time when my former company was low on travel budget. And so my manager said, well, look, we need to have this meeting virtually. And what she said was, can you fix the time zone problem? I thought, no, I can't fix the time zone problem. The earth is round and the sun is on one side of it and people sleep on the other side of it. And so I was just hoping that question would go away. But she came back a couple of weeks later and she said, have you fixed the time zone issue for this meeting? I was like, So I went back and what we realized was that the structure of a meeting is meeting time. And then frequently we have breakout time where we're breaking out into sub-teams. Well, we realized that we could run these multi-day meetings. These were like 3-4 day strategic planning meetings. And we could do the breakouts in time zone. And so the breakouts were moving around the world with the sun.
Oh, cool.
And then once a day, we would come together to actually compare notes. But the other thing that was happening was that we were passing information from time zone to time zone. So the report out from the breakout would pass via video. There was a text layer as well. So people were chatting asynchronously, but then the report outs from the breakouts were moving around the world. So you could have, it's very feasible to have, if you're disciplined, focused, mindful maybe is the right word, to run things that way on an ongoing basis.
I've never heard of that. I've heard of similar approaches because I do a lot of virtual facilitation myself, given my training angle. And I've used breakouts and large groups and all. I've never heard of that model for a team where it's moved. That's really, really fascinating. So that's something that I'm going to store in my back pocket if a project comes along that's relevant to. But I also loved what you mentioned about video, because if you hadn't mentioned it, I would have brought it up. Video and audio. So the way I work with a team, one who's in Africa, one in Latin America, 2 to 3 in Europe, depending on the week, is we use a lot of simple audio messages on Slack channels, but also sometimes Loom videos. So we're in a more complex piece of a project where we might have to share about, oh, I've built out this dashboard, or I've done this content model for that campaign, or whatever Dart, or for this presentation. We would create a video if I'm not online at the same time as them, which often happens with my travel. And we exchange a couple of videos, and it works really, really well. Troubleshooting videos work really, really well as well. I mean, the amount of remote work sessions 3 years on from COVID I do where people who don't use that type of communication in their channels often surprise me. I often have conversations with people. I've never used a recorded type of video to troubleshoot or to share a screen. Like, that brings us on to a different point, but I will say that there is a massive skills gap. I mean, you said this was about work, and that's one of my areas as well. I also work with the university as adjunct faculty out of Dublin, and the whole area of skills for remote work, skills for nomadism, because nearly all nomads are remote workers, is a massive gap going forward. In the World Economic Forum has called it out. Lots of different organizations have said we're not really preparing people. We threw everyone into forced work from home, and they all think that they're expert remote workers. But a lot of the practices then were survival tactics. They weren't good practices. People just got through it. They just got through it. That's a whole other area of discussion, but it's an interesting one for me because I'm often surprised to come across very almost teams that I would expect to be more advanced, not even using simple audio messaging. I mean, one of the ways I thank my team members with empathy and recognition in my voice is to leave a beautiful voice message. And some months I do it 2 or 3 times a month. We're just thanking them for project work or whatever. And the feedback I get is amazing on that. And it's a simple thing that takes a minute. People are saying it's remote work leadership skills, but I think it's remote work skills in general from my perspective. It shouldn't just be leaders. It should be everyone.
It's one of the mistakes I think we still make with online communication. We want it to be a replacement for in-person communication. And because of that, we think of it as sort of a lesser sometimes, or at least we used to. But the truth is, it's a different medium. And different media have different advantages in the way that music has different advantages for communication over written word. And so one of the real advantages of this as a medium is the possibility of recording. It's digital. You can record it. And we rarely use that as much as we should. We forget that when we become detached to location, we can become detached from synchronous communication.
Exactly. And I totally hear you. As you say, people try and replace face-to-face when they really should just be looking at all these tools in a different way. What would make me feel better? Would hearing Rowena's voice congratulating me or thanking me across the ways be more sincere and meaningful? 9 times out of 10, yes. Right? Like, rather than sending emoji. I mean, emojis are great. They have a place, but they're not quite the same. So I think it's really like, what are we trying to achieve? And then also for me, with my own team, I'm also checking in. Did you like my voice message? When we are doing the sync calls, what did you think when we did this? Did that work for you? How were those 2 videos when we were troubleshooting that project? So that bit of retrospective piece also helps. But I think it's really, really interesting because I think so many of these tools that have evolved during the pandemic, people are not using them well, but yet all the tech companies, as we well know, we're techies ourselves, are just building more and more and more. And often there's underutilization of the tools that are there, the tool stack that could be there. People are not using the functionality in some of the ways that they could. And the only way to do that, and as a master trainer and teacher myself, is you have to build in that cultural behavioral change over maybe 3 months. So if you introduce a new suite, you've got to say, right, who's using the recording function? Who's been using audio? Who's been sharing screens? Anybody using the whiteboard plug-in, for example, or whatever it is? And often I've come across teams who have just got all these tools and a tiny percentage is being used.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny because the companies who make the platforms are adding more and more features, but people just haven't found them in many cases.
Exactly. They don't know they exist.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been it's changed my mind about what digital nomadism is. It's really made me think differently about what it is. I very much appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Where can people learn more about you?
So they can simply put in Rowena Hennigan or RoRemote into LinkedIn. They can follow me. We're going to share some lovely links in the show notes today as well. I'll provide all of those to Dart from all the different companies I've mentioned, Neural, Boundless Live, Nomad Stays. So essentially, we're going to give a little library, Dart, for your travels where you can check out all these lists of different things and you can do a bit of digging. And also, of course, we'll share the Harvard Business Review and a couple of other articles. And I also wanted to offer everyone who's joining in and listening, as I said, I've got 2 LinkedIn courses. One is on nomadism and becoming a digital nomad. But the other one is with my top tips on combining being productive when you travel and work. And that's something for everyone, because nearly everyone who is a computer worker occasionally has to travel. So I'm happy to give free links to those as well in your show notes, Dart. And it's been really lovely to chat things through with you. And thanks for making me think. That's why I like having these conversations, because they're definitely a reflection point for me too.
Thank you very much. Talk again soon. Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer, Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.